In Service to Love, the relationship podcast that helps you create more love in the practical day-to-day, centering connection in the life of the modern family with your host, therapist, mother, and artist, Randé Dorn. Hello, welcome. This is the In Service to Love podcast, and I am your host, Randé Dorn. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I'm also a person and a mom. I am single currently. I was recently divorced a few years ago, and I think that's relevant, right? To know a little bit about who I am and where I'm coming from. I shared a little bit of that in the first episode. This is episode number 2. I'm recording things a little bit out of order, but this episode, what I'm excited about, it's really talking about what does it mean to how to connect to spirit. And some people's spirit can be defined in a lot of different ways. If we can talk about like your higher being, your inner being, your intuitive self, your higher self, God, the universe. There's a couple different names I think that we have for it. And I think that even the idea of defining it also at some point needs to be discussed. We're not going to discuss it. I'm not going to discuss it today, but because I'm what I wrestle with sometimes is, am I defining things in a way when I talk about spirituality or when I talk about spirit? Am I defining things in a way that lets me kind of circumvent some rules? And when I say that, it's like when most of us have been brought up on some education around spirituality connected to religion. And so there is a bit of a movement, I think. And I'm here for that too, right? Like I'm in a lot of those circles. So as I say some of the things that I might share today, know that I'm also in the throes of questioning. I'm also in the throes of trying to figure stuff out, right? But I think sometimes that when I talk to people who may say that they're for instance like spiritual, it's like, well, what does that mean if you're not spirit led? And if you're spirit led, if you're spiritual, which to me means you're spirit led, what spirit are we talking about? Right? Because we can also maybe consider, I guess I'm diving right in, consider, you know, spirit, ego, I should say, ego can sometimes um, be misinterpreted as spirit. We want to be led and connected to our desires and to our purpose. And we can also sometimes, from that place of ego, define that. And even as I say that out loud, I don't have an answer for that, but I'm going to throw that out there. So as I talk about the idea of connecting to spirit, or building the relationship with spirit, and either again higher self, God, the universe, however you again today want to define it. I have like three things that I wanted to share today, that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is this idea of listening to the body, right? So how do we feel in connection to spirit? And when I think of spirit, I think of this really loving, a beautiful energy that is always there, always expanding, always available, always in flow. So when we are not connected to spirit, we are out of alignment, we're out of flow, we are out of the stream. We we're going to feel that sense of disconnection. Ultimately, for me, the disconnection from love. So we're either in one of two places. We're either in connection to love or we're out of connection to love. There really isn't an in between where I'm kind of sort of connected. No, you're either in connected, or you are connected, or you're not connected to love. And we're going to always feel that tension, the push pull between moving into love and moving out of love. So the first one, when we think about being in connection to love, as human beings right now, we're in our bodies. And there's definitely the conversation of being these energetic beings. I believe in that. There is the connection to this idea that we are also always expanding, and that we can and will exist outside of our bodies. We existed before and we existed after. And obviously there are going to be thoughts, beliefs, and religions that either agree or disagree with that idea. But either way, in the present moment, we are in these bodies. And so when we think about being in connection to spirit, typically we're feeling that, right? I either feel in connection to flow, I feel in connection to spirit, I feel in connection to intention, I feel in connection to love. And then I feel the despair or the lack of that, which can show up in our bodies as depression. It can show up as anxiety. There's so much anxiety in the world right now. It can show up in our bodies as illness. It can show up in our bodies as injury. It can show up in right. We can just feel it that like something doesn't feel good, and so that's your first cue, like clue, right? Like, does it feel good or does it not feel good? And I'm bringing up the body because when we jump out of the body, when we numb ourselves, alcohol, with drugs, with sex, when we with overwork, right? When we or with our phones and video games, there's just different ways that we can really come out of the present and get out of our bodies. So not only are we disconnected, but we're numbing ourselves from the experience of disconnection. And so how do we even know at some point where we are in relationship to spirit, where we are in relationship to love, if we're not only disconnected, but we're now numb to the experience of disconnection? Because the experience of disconnection isn't necessarily there to harm you. It's there to tell you that you're disconnected. It's there as an invitation. It's there to give you a sense of, I guess, proximity, right? How far away am I from the experience of love? And I am going to say, not far. You're never far, right? Because again, love is always present. It is always there. It's always in flow. To me, the idea of spirit or love is always available. So you're never far from the experience, right? It is always available for you to connect. But I think we go into these experiences of numbing because at some point we start to believe that it's not available to us anymore. And those beliefs come up around: am I worthy of love? Have I done enough to be loved? Am I perfect enough to be loved? Am I good enough to be loved, to be connected? Right? So again, we disconnect for whatever reason, and then sometimes we numb, and then we stay in our numbness because we have created this narrative around our worth. And so it is us, that we have a certain level of responsibility of plugging back in, of creating that connection, of removing some of those belief systems that are keeping us distant from what is always available and available to all of us. So going back to the first idea is to listen to your body, right? To just check in, to say, okay, I want to get back into my body and I want to come back to a sense of being present. What is showing up for me? Where am I feeling achiness or uncomfortableness? Where am I feeling safety? Where am I feeling love? Can I just feel it in this part of my body or that part of my body? And if I can feel that in my body, can I expand it? Right? Can I ask for love to be even greater than where it is in my elbow right now? Can I send love down to my wrist from there? Can I send it up to my shoulders? Can I, and where it feels sticky, where it feels uncomfortable, can I give it love? Can I give it acceptance? Can I give it movement? Right? When there's a this this movement around embodiment that is starting to show up, and I'm in perfect agreement with that. I will probably be, or I'm in the process of developing a couple of programs around that myself. But this idea of embodiment means really to like, how do I stay present and come check back in, even if there's pain here. How can I come back to the body and allow myself to feel that, to be present with that, and to do even a quick body scan. Where am I feeling that pain? Where am I feeling that even that joy or that ecstasy? Right. The thing about some of these numbing agents, right, of either kind of completely checking out of our body, sometimes through something like alcohol, um, or we check into our body, but in these very uh, pinpointed exact ways, right? And so, the other movement around sex, sexuality, and pleasure, again, can be incredibly beautiful. But what does it mean if we're only localizing it in our genitals, right? If we're only spending time on making sure that we feel pleasure just in that one place, when our whole body is a pleasure system, right? Laughter is a pleasure, touch is a pleasure. The sensation of softness or heat or tickling can be a pleasure. And so why are we localizing it? Right? If we are playing video games all the time, we're just kind of localizing the sensation on our in our eyes in some ways, right? Taking in all this information in our hands. Maybe our heart is racing a little bit because, we're totally invested in this game and not being killed or whatever. But there is, again, we're not letting the presence and the sensation of really truly being alive in our body, um we're not letting it expand in the way that it could. So listening to your body. The other thing about this embodiment thing that was coming up for me today, again, around pleasure, around this sense of, and maybe this is just kind of in these coaching circles, this sense of wanting to be in our wildness and wanting even to be kind of witchy, this women's circles in particular, um, wanting to be in our deep pleasure. And again, I'm totally for that, right? And but I think that when I hear those terms, or what I'm thinking when I hear those terms, is that there's a strong desire to be liberated. There's a strong desire to be free. There's this desire to reclaim these words that, I think women used to be prosecuted for. And that is the place where I think it's a push against the what we call the kind of the patriarchy. I also think of it as a push against whiteness in a way. And when I say that, meaning that when I think of whiteness within the body, that it feels very like just head only, right? That word, that it's like I'm thinking, I'm organized, I'm structured, there, and so it's like this claiming of wildness or witchiness for me feels like this claim for this kind of like indigenous culture, this claim for of of sensuality or sexuality that feels earthy and to the ground, but to me, that's something that's always been in my body as someone who's not white, right? So, so it's like I, I'm I'm here for it, and I can feel where I am bristling with it, right? That I'm struggling with it. So, this is an aside that I'm putting out there, and please tell me what you think. Please tell me how you're coming up to or meeting, these terms or these words. But it again, it feels like this idea, I'm wild or I'm witchy because I'm wanting to get out of my head and into my body, and I'm wanting to, I think, again, deeply connect to this idea of spirituality, But is it coming to a spirituality that's not necessarily connected to anything, right? And when I say that, wildness is still it's still the body, right? I want to be wild in my body. I want to feel liberation in my body. I don't necessarily I don't see my body as spiritual that way. I see my body as a vessel to connect to spirituality. I see my body as because again, back to the beginning, when I die, if I am in belief that I am just energy, then this body also falls away. So I am more than just my body. And therefore, my sense of spirituality can be felt here, but it can't necessarily live here. So being in my wildness or being in my witchiness, to me I see it as a reach for liberation versus a reach for spirituality. And again, I could be totally wrong. Please tell me, if you have a different, a conversation around this. This is just something that's coming up for me today, like literally before I jumped on this. So I'm here's me being messy and vulnerable by throwing out some ideas that are just I'm staying curious, right? How do we stay curious with ideas um, without creating pain points around them? So again, embodiment, thinking of how do I stay present in my body so that I have access to spirituality, so that I have access to the feelings that give me the messages, that access to the feelings that allow for me to be in connection, right? So my body isn't the spirit, my body is the vessel. Number two. Number two. So with that in mind, I think from this embodied place, right? So now I'm just present in my body so that I am available. Let's put it that way. I'm present with my body and I'm available. So from that place of being available, how do those messages from spirit come through? How do those messages from God, from the universe, from your higher self come through? This is where I think there has to be a certain level of inner wisdom. And when I want to say like what makes sense to you, but but how do the messages come through for you? For some people, they hear it. They're just clear sentences. For some people, they see visuals as if a movie is playing. For some people, they see images like pictures. For some people, again, it may be a feeling or a color or a sense of something. I'll share for me, I either, especially when I'm working with a client, there's been moments where feel like I'm literally watching like a movie play out, and then I'm just dictating what I'm seeing to the client. Oh, when you're telling me something about, my experience with my parents, for instance, and I'll say, oh, so is it kind of like when your mom and dad are in the kitchen and your dad says this and your mom says that and then this happens and that happens and they're like, yeah, exactly. And for me, I'm literally just watching something and I'm just telling the client what I'm seeing. Is that a download? Is that a message? I mean, I take it as that because it isn't something I know in those moments, it's not something that I am like thinking of, right? Like I'm not constructing something, I'm watching something. For me, though, if it's what I would consider a message for me, it's usually words. And what I'll tell clients too is that when we are trying to connect to our higher self, our spirit, that spirit doesn't kind of live here, right? In this world where it's worried about oppression, to be honest with you. It's like it's not worried about what Sally said to you at work. It isn't in the kind of nitty gritty, the petty of things, because it is living on such a higher level of love, acceptance, and understanding that it's not gossipy. right? And it's not getting in the weeds with us in that way because it's always trying to actually guide us to that higher place of love. It's always trying to guide us like out of that. So why would it come and join us there? No. It stays where it is. It stays kind of living in this really beautiful, I imagine, I don't have an image for it, but it lives in this higher plane, this higher frequency, right? This higher energy. And so it's always inviting us to reach for that height. So it's not down here. It's not in the pettiness, it's not in the weeds. So the messages when I feel like I'm hearing something or that I'm getting something, they are gentle, they are clear. It's not berating me, it's not yelling at me, it's not trying to convince me of something because again, it doesn't have to, right? Because for it to come to this place of you should do this and this is why didn't you do that, right? That's lowering the energy of spirit to me, right? That's acting human, right? Trying to control me, trying to convince me. It doesn't need to do that because again, it knows all, sees all. It doesn't. What is it trying to keep me from? A terrible experience? What does it care? I learn from those terrible experiences. I grow either way, right? So any kind of guidance or direction of spirit is coming from a loving place and it'll love me whatever direction I take. So think about how messages come to you, and it can be different for everybody. Like, for me, I'll tell you too a story that is kind of all one. But it was the beginning of the pandemic. It was the summer of the pandemic, and I had been working at CalArts. I was a counselor there. I was there for 2.5 years, so it was 2 years in, and it was the summer, and I just got this feeling, this sense like go to the water. Is what I was sensing, is what I was hearing. So if you know me, and if you don't, I'm gonna tell you, I'm not a water person. I'm not someone who just loves to go to the beach. I'm not someone who loves to be in a bathing suit. I no, I don't think I'd been in a bathing suit for a number of years at this point. So go to water, go to the water, right? And so I at one point I did go. I went in the middle of the night with my kids and one of my best friends and just put my feet in. I love going when I do go. I love going at night. I love when it's dark and I just kind of play in the water. And then I heard, go to the water, but in Carmel. So again, I'm in Los Angeles, I'm in California. Carmel is up north. I've never been to Carmel. I've never had a desire to go to Carmel. Why? What is there for me? But that's what I was hearing. Go to the water, go to Carmel. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to listen to that. So that same friend, another one, I invited them. I got this Airbnb kind of last minute for October of that year of 2020. And we went to this little house and it had a creek in the back of the house and took a beautiful drive up there. Met my other friend, and the next morning we just kind of rolled up our pants. My best friend Tamara and I, we went with my other friend Yen, and Tamara and I like took our shoes off and we got into the creek. Now it was only like 2 inches, 3 inches. It wasn't we weren't going to be washed away or anything. I put my bare naked feet in that creek, and it was one of the most beautiful days, first of all. Just gorgeous. But anyway, I put my feet in that creek, and what I heard was quit your job and you're up. Those were the messages that came through. And again, it was just clear. It wasn't going to fight me. It wasn't going to convince me. But it had sent me all the way to Carmel, right? And something to think about when we're thinking about listening to our like the messages and how they come through for us. When I work with my clients, when I talk to my clients about this, is that again, your spirit, your guides, universe, they're not going to give you the big messages unless you follow the small ones, right? So again, when we think about how do we connect, the first one is listening to your body, right? Listening to whether your body feels in connection or out of connection. And then the second one is figuring out how messages come through to you, right? And the first messages could be eat this lunch, get up an hour earlier. It could be go left or go right. It could be put that sweater on, right? Like it is, think about that you have to, when you're building your relationship with spirit, that they know where you are and you have to strengthen that muscle in order to get the bigger leaps, the bigger messages. So first it sent me, go put your feet, go out to the water. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I live in LA. The beach isn't that far. Okay, go to Carmel. I'm like, okay, that's a bigger ask. That costs some money. Right? It's a middle of a pandemic. But okay, right? And then quit your job. Like what? Right? Because the pandemic's not over. This is October 2020. This was a full-time job. I was working part-time in private practice. This is a full-time job with benefits. And I'm co-parenting my two kids with their father, but I still have to take care of my part, right? However, I need to provide for my children and myself. I'm unpartnered, it's me providing. So I had to get these small messages before I got the big one. Right. And I think sometimes when we're outside of our element, right, when we're out of town, when we're just away from the stuff, it can be much easier for us to receive a message like that and feel how it resonates and feel how true it is. The other thing I want to share was that this was my dream job. I had been wanting to work at CalArts. First of all, I'm an alum. I got my master's there for dance and choreography. And while I was on campus there in 1999, 2000, I know I look beautiful, I look young. But in 1999, 2000, I I heard work here. You need to work here. You'll be working here. You should work here. It was again very, very clear. So then for the next 20 years, 18, 19 years, whatever, I kept applying mostly for dance jobs because I wasn't a therapist at the time. I was a dancer, I was a choreographer. So I applied for dance jobs, but then at some point I just tried for an administrative job because I knew I was supposed to work there. And the other part of that is that I really wanted to work there. I wanted to be in an art college. I love artists. I love supporting artists. I love being in the midst of artists, even if I'm not making art at the moment myself. So I had no idea that by the time I got a job there, 20 years later, 19 years later, that I would be there as a therapist. That was not ever on my agenda to do or be. Sorry if you keep hearing clicking. It's my ring. I keep hitting it on the desk. So I just wanted to keep you posted on that. So anyway, I by the time I got there, I was hired with another woman who was hired at the exact same time, and I call her my work twin. And at the same time, my boss had only been there for a few years. Just I want to say that the configuration didn't exist before I arrived. So if I had gotten that job any sooner, I probably would have been unhappy. But I'm going to tell you, when I got that job, it was like Camelot. It was the most magical place I had ever worked at, that department in particular. And then being around all these amazing artists, all these amazing kids, just the energy of the art making, the laughter, the support. I'm going to tell you, I was so happy. That was partly why I ended up getting a divorce because felt the contrast between being at work and being at home. And home wasn't a disaster. I just wasn't as happy as I was at work. And that level of contrast was too much to bear. right? So I was supported even by that job and by my coworkers as I made that transition. So this place was incredibly near and dear to me. And I was devastated during the pandemic when we had to start working from home because I was missing everybody. So then here was this message to quit this job that it took me almost 20 years to get. I'd only been there for 2 years, right? And it made me so I can't express enough how happy I was. And as I expressed that, I want to give you permission to find that in your own work. You should be that happy in your work. And if not, do something about it, whatever that means for you. That doesn't mean quit. It just means maybe there's some way for you to figure it out or to talk to someone or to change it up or navigate it. Or maybe it's just a belief or perspective shift. There is no reason why you should be spending 40 plus, for some people, hours a week being miserable. It's just too much time to be wasted here on this earth. So Spirit was talking to me. And I was like, no, no, I don't want to. But the message was so clear. And I have been working on strengthening this relationship for so long that I knew I needed to follow it. So I did tell my boss. I cried, and she was incredibly lovely, incredibly supportive. And can I tell you, I think I told her around the end of October, beginning of November. I left in December. By the time I left, I found out my work twin wasn't coming back. I found out that that boss that I love and still love and am in love with was also quitting. I eventually found out that they even moved the whole department in terms of it's now in a different place of the building. I found out my other supervisor was also being moved. So the place that I loved, to me, in some level, was decimated. It wasn't what it would have been. And then I would have been stuck because of my commitment to those kids. If I'd stayed on past December, I would have finished out the second semester, and that would have meant continuing to work from home hours and hours and hours because those kids they just needed so much support. No one knew when this pandemic was going to be over. And I was still doing time in private practice. And I was still, my kids were at home at some point working. Now they ended up going back to school in February of 2021. But I never would have been able to take them to school if I was still working those kind of hours at home. So the message to quit my job really set me up to continue to live my life in a way that actually created a lot more ease and a lot more pleasure and a lot more love. My work in private practice pretty much doubled financially, but the workload decreased. Because when I was working full time and then working part time, I was working 6 days a week. I was working, 50 something hours a week. It was sustainable only because I didn't know anything different. So this message from Spirit totally saved and changed my life. And that's why I'm talking about this today, because I really believe in this connection. I really believe that the connection, the relationship with Spirit is here to improve your life. It's here to look out for you. Now, did I have to leave something? Was there a loss? Was there a grieving process? Of course. That showed up when I got divorced as well. There was a huge loss in having to dismantle my married life to start a single life. There was a huge loss in having to leave a full time job and then fill the gap of that with work and financially as an independent private practice practitioner. And the requirement was for me to stay in my body in the grieving of that and the loss of that And the requirement was also to reach for the joy that was also available to me, to feel that everything that was happening to me, the perspective, everything that was happening to me was coming from a place of love. If things are being removed out of my life, out of your life, it's still loving. And that might be really hard to chew on or to take when what we think bad things are happening to us. But when I see those things from the perspective that I am always loved and that I'm always connected to love, when I see that perspective from a place where I'm never alone in this, and that these moments within the scope of my life, or within the scope of, again, if your belief system is we're infinite and we never not exist. And again, that's a belief system that is different for many people. That then these are blips. These are moments, and even a moment that lasts a few months or even a few years, in the scope of how big some of our lives are, it is still a moment. And if, even though I have to go through a moment that's incredibly difficult, wouldn't you prefer to go through it with the feeling that you were loved while you're going through it, versus feeling like I'm being tortured or I'm being punished while I go through this, or that there's no love to be had while I'm suffering? There's no love to be had while I'm moving through this difficult thing. I mean, again, it's, I think there's that place where it's a choice. It's a choice to either connect or disconnect. And when we choose to disconnect, then that's when we start choosing the other things. We start choosing the experience of drugs, or the experience of alcohol, or the experience of. And I know that life is incredibly, incredibly difficult. Again, this reach for ultimate pleasure, I think, is so important. The reach for joy, the reach for happiness, it is so important. And it's not the only thing. Those things have to be balanced with loss. They have to be balanced with grief. Grief, loss, tragedy has to exist. You cannot have one without the other. And it's the opposite way too. I cannot have grief without knowing that love exists. I cannot have loss or longing without knowing that ecstasy and joy also exist. Because I feel the absence of it in my grief. I feel the absence of feeling better. So they both come hand in hand, and they both have to exist within this lifetime. And so the last part that I already kind of started talking about is this idea of, I'm going to start putting this out there, this idea of free will, and this idea of 100% responsibility. And again, it's something that can be, again, a difficult concept, because we can hold so staunchly in our moments of being victimized, and that experience of being victimized does exist. And yet we are 100% responsible for our lives. Because if we say, well, I'm only 50% responsible and someone else is 50% responsible, then that's, to me, that's when I ask that question. Then what's the point? What's the point if you can always be deterred because always you're only 50% responsible for you, your life, or who you are? So, in order for you, and this is also coming from a spiritual and biblical sense too, take it however you want, grain of salt, is that for you to have free will, you have to have 100% ability to choose. So if you only have a 50% responsibility or ability to choose, then you do not have free will. And so everything else kind of goes out the window. Then it's like, well, why try, or why do this, or why change, or because someone else is responsible for me. And again, I'm not saying that we don't have unexpected things happen, that we don't have moments where we feel taken advantage of or victimized, but we can still own who we are in those moments. And that can be a really delicate conversation. And again, not one I want to go too deep into right now, because to me that it's a strategy that one can use to move through trauma. But I don't want to dive too deeply. But I just do want you to consider that I have to have free will to choose a relationship with spirit. I also have 100% free will to not choose a relationship with spirit. So I can choose to numb out. I can choose to jump out of my body. I can choose to not be here or disappear, even though I exist. Or I can choose to be in relationship. I can choose to be in love. I have to have a choice. And so there's this moment when when people will say, especially like law of attraction stuff, or when they talk about manifesting or creating, where it's like you're moving towards your desire. And then there's quote unquote this test that happens, right? And so for me, I'm thinking, I again, I'm looking for love, I'm making myself available for love, and I'm dating, and I decide I want to choose to date a different caliber of person, right? Or maybe I just want to date someone who shares more of my interests or less of my interests, whatever. I get to choose that, right? But if I'm going a certain route, I'm like, I'm only dating people who wear black pants, for instance. And then I decide I'm only going to date people who wear blue pants. But then here's that person, here's that test, here's that man who shows up with those black pants. And I'm like, oh, here's the test. Like, what if I don't pass it? What if I fall so deeply in love with this person with black pants? I'm being tested, and I have to say no to the test so that I can stand, really firmly in my new decision that I only want to date people who wear blue pants. Here's something to consider. To not think of it as a test, but think of it as an option. And again, going back to that idea of free will. So I'm in relationship to spirit, and there's a certain level of guidance that comes from that. There's a certain level of love and holding. I'm never alone. And in this moment, I'm saying I want to move towards a new desire. I want to move or more clearly in this direction that I've always said that I've always wanted men in blue pants. I just wouldn't let myself have it. And now here's this person who comes up with the black pants. Oh, I was being tested. And it's like, no, what if we look at this only as an option? Because how can I choose to really stand for men who only wear blue pants if I don't have a man who wears black pants for me not to choose? Does that make sense? Like, in order for me to have my quote unquote free will to be 100% responsible for who I am, I have to be presented with options for me to 100% choose the life that I want. If I want an abundant life, a wealthy life, I have to have the option of poverty. Because if I don't have the option of poverty, then it's not my free will. It's just what happened to me. It is someone, I'm the victim of my own wealth because it was just given to me. It was just, and yes, we all have circumstances, right? There's some people who have certain privileges or advantages. They still have the option of poverty. So in those moments when if I'm seeking my wealth, even if I have some, and there's this quote unquote test, to say it's not a test for me to spend all my money and gamble it away. It is an option. And I have to have this option. I have to have someone saying, you should give me all your money. We should go to Vegas. In some ways, I need that test or, in quotes, option for me to be in my free will, to feel my free will through this lifetime, and choose the path that I say that I want it. Options, free will, listening to your body, listening to the messages. And all of these are about just strengthening your relationship to love, strengthening your relationship to spirit. Because again, I have to be able to choose spirit or not choose spirit. I have to be able to choose love or not choose love. I have to be able to choose wealth or not choose wealth. I have to be able to choose relationships or not choose relationships. I have to be 100% in control of how I navigate the options in my life. Because if I'm 50% responsible or irresponsible, 50% a victim, then I don't have free will and I cannot, none of this makes sense. So feel free to tell me. No, I don't know if I want you to tell me if I'm wrong. No, you go, that's fine. You can write me. And you can ask questions and you can say, oh, here's a better way, right? As I said earlier. Stay curious. Stay curious about what I'm saying. What is it? Let's go back over these things. What does it feel like in your body as I say all of this? What does it feel like? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling tight? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling exhilarated? Are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling excited? What messages are coming through? Not arguments, because if it's a speech, if it's a monologue, that's your ego. If you hear a speech or a monologue when you're trying to figure out your yes or your no, or is this a spirit-led message or not? If there's a monologue happening, if your own head is trying to convince you or something, it's a no. That's not spirit. That's your ego trying to push something through, right? Listen to your body. Listen to the messages. How do messages think about your own background? How do messages come through for you? We all have a way. Are you seeing visions? Are you seeing movies? Are you seeing pictures? Are you hearing thoughts? Are you hearing words? Maybe a song comes on for you. Maybe you see numbers. It's for you. That's for you to figure out and for you to look at your own history and figure that out, right? Again, what is your free will saying to you? Is what I'm saying an option or a test? And you're like, I do not choose that. Or is it something that feels like in alignment with you? Stay curious, right? Choose love and see where love leads you. Even as you listen to me, even as I start these conversations within you. And again, feel free to reach out. I don't have a way for you to do that right this second. So when this gets published, then I'm sure there'll be some kind of email or something where you can contact me with your words of wisdom, your words of thought. And I'm not being facetious when I say words of wisdom, right? That I really believe that all of us have the capacity to um, stay wise, to stay connected, to come from that place of curiosity, of love, of alignment. So I'm happy to get your thoughts. I'm happy to be in community with you. I'm happy to stay curious with you. I'm happy to make mistakes and not get it right with you. Feel free to do the same with me. All right, I will end there. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much. I'm going to say this in advance for sharing your thoughts with me. I will be doing a ton of these. And so if you have any questions that you want to have me think about or even talk about, feel free. I think that's it. I feel complete with these thoughts. I am sending you so much love. I hope this was helpful and provocative in the way of just again provoking your relationship with love and spirit. Sending you lots and lots of love. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. As always, please share, comment, and like so we can grow our community and bring more love to those you love. Great reviews mean a great deal to our work, so take a few minutes and write us a love letter today. Our hearts appreciate every word. Tune in next week for another episode.